back for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be tackling the Hyperloop.
Ooh, exciting.
Yeah, it is exciting. It's something that I've been looking forward to. So, you know that super fast transportation system that Elon Musk proposed way back in 2013?
Right.
Everyone was talking about how revolutionary it was.
Yeah, revolutionary.
But what if I told you that those revolutionary ideas actually go back over 200 years?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, buckle up, because we're going to uncover some of those previous attempts at vacuum tube transportation,
Okay.
why they failed, and what those historical lessons might mean for the future of the Hyperloop.
Yeah, the Hyperloop has a surprisingly long and interesting prehistory.
Really?
Yeah, and it all starts way back in the early 1800s with a man named George Medhurst, a clockmaker from England.
Okay, a clockmaker envisioning high-speed transportation. That already sounds intriguing. What was he thinking?
Well, in 1810, he proposed using air pressure to send mail and goods through tubes.
Okay.
And just 2 years later, he was already thinking bigger. He was picturing a system to move people. He even published a pamphlet
Oh, wow.
claiming he could transport people and goods at 60 miles per hour,
60 miles an hour.
which would have been mind-blowingly fast at the time.
I mean, that's incredible. 60 miles per hour in the early 1800s.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if he was just a dreamer or if he had some actual technical ideas behind this vision.
Well, he did have some ideas about using air pressure differentials to
Right.
propel carriages through tunnels.
Okay.
But the technology to achieve it just wasn't there yet.
Right.
And you're right, he was definitely a dreamer.
I mean, it's crazy to think about because that was an era when horse-drawn carriages were the norm.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So even back then, people were fantasizing about faster, more efficient ways to travel.
Uh-huh.
And it seems like that human desire for speed and convenience is pretty universal.
Absolutely. And that desire led to some pretty ambitious proposals.
Oh, really?
Yeah, take, for instance, the London and Edinburgh Vacuum Tunnel Company of 1825.
Okay, now that's a name that sparks curiosity. What was their grand plan?
They wanted to build a tunnel between, you guessed it,
London and Edinburgh.
London and Edinburgh,
Yeah.
and they were going to use vacuum power to propel trains through this tunnel.
Interesting.
They even claimed a journey would only take 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
Ooh.
From London to Edinburgh. That's faster than it takes me to get to the grocery store.
Right.
I can only imagine what the reactions to that proposal were back then.
Yeah, there was a lot of skepticism, and for good reason. One publication even reprinted the company's proposal just to throw ridicule on it.
Oh, wow.
The idea was so outlandish for the time
Yeah.
that a popular satirical illustrator, William Heath, even created an etching mocking the idea.
Oh, I'd love to see that etching. What did it depict?
It showed a giant metal tube launching people from Greenwich Hill all the way to Bengal.
Wow.
Thanks to the supposed genius of the Grand Vacuum Tube Company, it really captured the absurdity of the idea,
Yeah.
given the technology available at the time.
Yeah, it's just fascinating to see how these early attempts at tube transportation
Right.
were met with this mix of excitement and skepticism.
Yeah.
And it just makes you wonder, are we reacting to the Hyperloop in a similar way today?
Yeah.
Are we letting the hype overshadow the potential pitfalls?
That's a really good question, and something we should keep in mind as we explore these ideas further.
Yeah.
Our next stop is another intriguing chapter, atmospheric railways.
Atmospheric railways. Now, those sound fascinating.
Well,
Were they essentially an early version of the vacuum tube concept?
not exactly.
I-
Instead of creating a vacuum inside the tube, atmospheric railways used steam-powered pumps to create a partial vacuum in a pipe
Okay.
that was running alongside the tracks.
Right.
And a piston connected to the train traveled inside this pipe, and the higher air pressure behind it pushed the train forward.
So they were harnessing air pressure differentials to propel the trains. That's a clever idea.
Oh.
Did it actually work?
It did,
Okay.
for a short time anyway. The South Devon Railway, championed by the famous engineer Isambard Kingdom Brunel,
Okay.
even implemented an atmospheric railway on part of its line.
Oh, wow. And there was a lot of initial excitement about the technology.
Atmospheric railways seem like a brilliant idea on paper. So what factors led to their eventual demise? And could those same factors maybe pose a threat to the Hyperloop?
Well, the biggest problem was the difficulty of maintaining an airtight seal in the pipe.
Oh, I see.
They used leather flaps for sealing, but they would dry out and become brittle.
Okay.
And get this, rats would often chew on them.
Rats. Imagine having your multi-million-dollar transportation system foiled by rodents. That does raise some interesting questions about the vulnerability of these types of systems. Would the Hyperloop face similar maintenance and reliability issues? especially over long distances.
It's certainly something to consider.
Yeah.
And ultimately, those problems with maintaining the seals, coupled with the emergence of more efficient steam and electric locomotives, led to the decline of atmospheric railways.
So another seemingly promising transportation technology falls by the wayside. But our story doesn't end there, does it? Where do we go from here in our journey through the history of the Hyperloop? Our next stop takes us to the early 20th century with the emergence of a new and potentially game-changing technology. Magnetic levitation, or maglev.
Maglev. Now we're starting to get into more familiar territory, but I'm guessing the early concepts for maglev were quite different from what we see today.
You're right.
Okay.
To understand those early concepts, we need to introduce three key figures.
Okay.
First, we have Robert Goddard, an American physicist,
Okay.
who way back in 1904 imagined a levitated train
Uh-huh.
traveling through a vacuum tube.
Okay.
He even envisioned it going from New York to Boston in a mere 10 minutes.
10 minutes from New York to Boston.
Yeah.
That sounds awfully familiar to some of the promises we hear about the Hyperloop today.
Indeed.
Yeah.
It seems the dream of rapid coast-to-coast travel has been around for quite a while. And
Yeah.
now around the same time, we have Émile Bachelet,
Okay.
a French electrician who had emigrated to the United States.
Okay.
He filed a patent for levitated high-speed trains
Okay.
and even built a working model
Oh, wow.
that got a lot of public attention.
So multiple minds were converging on this idea of magnetic levitation for transportation.
Exactly.
Okay.
And our third figure is Boris Petrovich Weinberg, a Russian physicist.
Okay.
Between 1911 and 1913, he built his own small-scale model of a maglev train in a vacuum tube.
Oh.
He then proposed a full-scale system
Okay.
capable of reaching speeds of 800 to 1,000 kilometers per hour.
Wow. Those are some serious speeds, especially for the early 1900s.
You're right.
His vision seems strikingly similar to the modern Hyperloop concept.
It is remarkably similar. He even imagined passengers traveling in oxygen-supplied pods.
Wow.
Remember, this was all happening before World War I.
It's incredible how far back these ideas go. But I'm guessing, like those earlier attempts, none of these early maglev concepts came to fruition.
You're absolutely right. The technology just wasn't there yet, and then the war broke out,
Yeah.
shifting priorities and resources.
So what became of Goddard's vacuum tube transportation idea after the war? Did he continue to pursue it?
He did.
Okay.
He continued to refine his ideas. And just before he died in 1945,
Right.
he applied for a patent on a vacuum tube transportation system.
Huh.
That patent was eventually granted to his wife in 1950,
Oh, wow.
but the world had changed after the war. The focus shifted to automobiles and air travel, and interest in rail transportation, including Goddard's concept, faded.
Yeah, it just seems like every time these tube transportation ideas gained some momentum, something came along to derail them.
Yeah.
But the dream didn't die completely, did it?
No, it didn't.
I'm guessing the story continues, and we're about to enter a new era in our exploration of high-speed transportation.
You're right. The quest for faster travel never really ends.
Right.
And even though interest in vacuum tube transportation waned after the war,
Right.
the seeds had been planted.
Okay.
In 1972, a researcher at the Rand Corporation named Robert Salter brought forth a new vision, the planetron.
Planetron.
Yeah.
That sounds ambitious. What was
Big.
Salter proposing?
Oh, it was ambitious indeed.
Okay.
He envisioned what he called tubecraft.
Tubecraft.
Yeah. Riding on electromagnetic waves within a network of evacuated tubes, spanning entire continents
Wow.
and reaching supersonic speeds. He even suggested extending the planetron worldwide using undersea tunnels.
So that's thinking big. It sounds like a science fiction writer's dream.
It does.
But I'm guessing the planetron, like its predecessors, never got off the ground.
You're right again. The technological and logistical challenges were simply too great at the time.
Yeah, makes sense.
But while these grand visions like the planetron remained unrealized, maglev technology itself started making some real progress in the latter half of the 20th century.
Ah, so we're finally starting to see some tangible advancements in maglev. What were some of the key developments during this period?
Well, Japan and Germany really took the lead in developing and testing maglev systems.
Right.
And while they weren't vacuum tubes, high-speed rail networks like the Shinkansen in Japan and the Train à grande vitesse in France
Right.
showed a growing demand and potential for high-speed rail travel. For those unfamiliar, these are networks of high-speed trains that crisscross their respective countries.
Right. So the concept of high-speed rail was gaining traction.
Yeah.
But what about maglev specifically? Did any working maglev systems emerge during this time?
They did,
Okay.
but on a much smaller scale than those early ambitious visions.
Okay.
Germany built a maglev test track in 1984,
Okay.
and Japan was steadily refining its maglev technology,
Okay.
eventually hitting a record speed of 603 kilometers per hour on a test track in 2015.
Wow, that's incredibly fast.
Yeah,
But I imagine translating those test speeds into a safe and reliable commercial system is a whole different challenge.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And as we've seen from our historical journey, these ambitious transportation projects often face unforeseen obstacles and delays.
Right.
So while there was excitement about maglev, progress towards large-scale implementation was much slower than many had hoped.
So when did the first commercial maglev line actually start operating? Was it around this time?
The first commercial maglev line opened in Shanghai in 2004, connecting the airport to the financial district.
Okay.
It was based on German maglev technology.
Okay.
Then, a year later, Japan opened its Linamo line, a short maglev route built for the 2005 World Expo.
Oh, cool.
Since then, a few other short, relatively low-speed maglev lines have popped up in South Korea and China.
So maglev made it out of the testing phase and into limited commercial operation. That's a significant step.
Yeah.
Are there any larger scale maglev projects in the works today?
There is one notable project underway in Japan, the Chuo Shinkansen.
Okay.
It's planned to be a high-speed maglev line connecting Tokyo and Osaka
Okay.
with a projected top speed of 505 kilometers per hour.
Wow, that would be amazing.
Yeah.
But given the history of these types of projects, I have to ask, is it actually going to happen? Or are we going to see the same delays and setbacks that plagued those earlier attempts?
That's the million-dollar question. The
Yeah.
Chuo Shinkansen has already experienced a few postponements.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it's not expected to be completed until the late 2020s. It seems the story of high-speed transportation is often one of ambition, clashing with the realities of engineering and, of course, funding.
That's a perfect segue into our next topic, the modern Hyperloop concept.
Right.
Because while maglev was struggling to gain widespread adoption,
Yeah.
a new concept emerged,
Right.
promising even greater speeds and efficiency,
Eh?
the Hyperloop.
Exactly.
And as you'll recall, Elon Musk brought the Hyperloop into the spotlight in 2013 with his Hyperloop Alpha proposal. But as we've seen today, many of the core ideas behind the Hyperloop aren't actually that new.
Right.
They've been floating around for centuries.
They have.
Yeah, it's fascinating to see how these ideas have evolved and resurfaced over
Yeah.
time. But before we dive into the specifics of the modern Hyperloop, let's take a quick break.
But
When we come back, we'll explore how Musk's proposal reignited the dream of ultra-high-speed tube transportation and examine whether this time it might actually become a reality. All right, we're back and ready to continue our exploration of the Hyperloop. Before the break, we were talking about how maglev technology was slowly making progress, but still facing those challenges and becoming a widespread form of transportation.
yeah.
Then in 2013, Elon Musk kind of enters the scene with his Hyperloop proposal.
Right.
And suddenly everyone's talking about super fast travel through vacuum tubes again. It's like history's repeating itself, isn't it?
It is, in a way. Musk's proposal certainly reignited that interest in the concept.
Yeah.
And it captured the public's imagination in a way that those earlier maglev projects hadn't quite managed to do.
You're right. There was so much hype surrounding the Hyperloop. It was
Yeah.
being touted as this revolutionary, game-changing technology. But as we've seen today, many of the ideas behind it have been around for centuries.
Right.
Did Musk acknowledge those earlier attempts in his proposal?
He did, to some extent.
Okay.
He referenced Robert Goddard's work and the concept of vacuum tube transportation.
Right.
But he framed his Hyperloop proposal as a more technologically advanced and feasible solution.
So was it just hype, or did Musk bring something new to the table? What were the key elements of his Hyperloop Alpha proposal?
Well, the core concept is similar to those earlier visions,
Okay.
passengers traveling in pods through a near vacuum tube.
Right.
But Musk's proposal incorporated some specific technologies and design elements that he argued would make the Hyperloop more efficient and achievable.
Like what? What were some of the key innovations he proposed?
Well, he proposed using air bearings to levitate the pods,
Okay.
similar to an air hockey table.
Okay.
He also suggested using linear induction motors for propulsion
Okay.
and regenerative braking to recapture energy.
Interesting.
And crucially, he emphasized using solar panels to power the system, making it, in theory, very energy efficient.
So he brought together a combination of existing technologies
Yeah.
and presented them in a new way,
Yeah.
packaged as this sleek, futuristic transportation system.
Yeah, exactly.
And he coupled that with bold claims about speed and cost effectiveness,
Right.
suggesting the Hyperloop could travel at speeds exceeding 700 miles per hour
Right.
and could be built at a fraction of the cost of traditional high-speed rail.
Yeah.
Those are some pretty audacious claims.
They are?
It's no wonder people got excited.
Yeah.
But after the initial wave of excitement, did anyone actually try to build this thing? Did any companies take up the Hyperloop challenge?
They did.
Okay.
In fact, several companies emerged,
Oh.
each with their own vision for making the Hyperloop a reality.
Right.
Two of the most prominent are Virgin Hyperloop One and Hyperloop TT.
Virgin Hyperloop One, that name definitely rings a bell.
Okay.
Didn't they build a test track somewhere?
Yes, they did.
Okay.
Virgin Hyperloop One, backed by Richard Branson,
Okay.
built a 500-meter test track in the Nevada desert. And in 2020, they conducted a test with a pod carrying 2 passengers.
So they actually put people in a Hyperloop pod and sent them down a track. What speeds did they achieve?
They reached a speed of 172 kilometers per hour.
172 kilometers per hour. That's pretty fast,
Yeah.
but it's nowhere near the 700 miles per hour that Musk envisioned.
Right.
How do Hyperloop proponents explain this discrepancy?
They argued that this was just a preliminary test
Okay.
on a short track, and they claim that with longer tracks and further technological advancements, much higher speeds are achievable.
Okay.
But critics point to this test as evidence that the Hyperloop's promised speeds are simply unrealistic.
So the jury's still out on whether those super high speeds are actually attainable.
It is.
What about Hyperloop TT? What has been their approach?
Hyperloop TT, which stands for Hyperloop Transportation Technologies,
Okay.
has focused more on developing the technology and infrastructure for the Hyperloop rather than high-speed tests. They have a 320-meter test track in France and have been working on various aspects of the system, like the passenger pods and the magnetic levitation system.
So we have these companies actively pursuing the Hyperloop dream.
We do.
But are there any actual commercial Hyperloop lines in operation or even close to being operational?
As of today, no.
Really?
Yeah, there have been feasibility studies and proposals for Hyperloop routes around the world,
Right.
but none have materialized into actual construction.
So all this Hyperloop hype, and yet we're still waiting for the first paying passenger to take a ride.
We are.
It makes you wonder if the Hyperloop is just another overhyped idea destined to fail.
Yeah.
So let's examine the evidence
Okay.
and see what insights we can glean from history. One expert who has been particularly vocal about the Hyperloop's challenges is Vaclav Smil.
Yes. Smil is a renowned energy and transportation analyst,
Okay.
and he has been quite critical of the Hyperloop,
Okay.
arguing that its proponents often overlook or downplay the immense technical and economic challenges.
Okay, let's break down some of those challenges. You mentioned earlier that the Virgin Hyperloop 1 test achieved a much lower speed than promised.
Right.
What are some of the other hurdles facing the Hyperloop?
Well, one of the most fundamental issues is the pressure differential.
Okay.
Remember, the Hyperloop is supposed to operate in a near-vacuum environment.
Right.
This means the tube needs to be incredibly strong
Okay.
to withstand the immense pressure from the outside atmosphere.
Right.
Smil has pointed out that maintaining this pressure differential over hundreds of kilometers,
Right.
especially in areas prone to earthquakes or extreme temperatures, would be incredibly difficult and expensive.
That makes sense. And haven't we seen similar challenges with those earlier attempts at vacuum tube transportation? Those projects also struggle to maintain a vacuum over long distances.
Exactly. It's one thing to create a near vacuum in a short test track.
Right.
It's quite another to maintain it over vast distances and varying environmental conditions. And as we've seen with those historical examples, even small leaks can significantly reduce efficiency
Yeah.
and potentially compromise safety.
Speaking of safety, that's another big concern with the Hyperloop. What are some of the potential safety risks associated with traveling at such high speeds in a near vacuum tube?
Well, the most obvious risk is a breach in the tube.
Okay.
Even a small puncture could lead to rapid decompression,
Right.
which would be catastrophic for passengers.
Yeah.
And remember, these pods would be traveling at hundreds of kilometers per hour.
It sounds pretty terrifying, to be honest. I'm starting to understand why Smil and others are so skeptical. So we have the technical challenges of maintaining a vacuum
Right.
and ensuring safety.
Right.
What about the cost? Hyperloop projects are often presented as being more cost-effective than traditional high-speed rail.
Yeah.
But is that realistic?
That's another area where Smil and other critics have raised serious concerns.
Okay.
They point to the fact that large infrastructure projects almost always go over budget, And given the unprecedented engineering challenges involved in building a Hyperloop, it's reasonable to assume that the actual costs would far exceed initial estimates.
So you're saying that the Hyperloop, even if it could overcome the technical and safety hurdles,
Right.
might simply be too expensive to build and operate. It's starting to sound like this dream might be out of reach, both technically and financially.
It's certainly possible. And a 2022 survey conducted by the International Maglev Board supports this view.
Tell me more about that survey. Who did they survey and what were the key findings?
The survey gathered responses from transportation experts worldwide,
Okay.
and the results were quite telling.
Okay.
A significant number of respondents expressed serious doubts about the feasibility of the Hyperloop.
Really?
Yeah, many cited concerns about the complexity of the technology, the potential safety risks, and the likelihood of cost overruns.
So it's not just a few vocal critics who are skeptical. It seems like there's a growing consensus among transportation experts that the Hyperloop faces some very real and perhaps insurmountable challenges.
Right.
But what about the general public? Are people still as enthusiastic about the Hyperloop as they were back in 2013 when Musk first proposed it?
That's a good question. It's hard to say for sure how public opinion has shifted.
Right,
There's
yeah.
no doubt that the Hyperloop captured the imagination of many,
Mm-hmm.
but as the realities and challenges become clearer, I think we're starting to see a more cautious and pragmatic view emerge.
I think you're right. The initial excitement is giving way to a more realistic assessment of the situation.
Yeah.
So given all these challenges, what does the future hold for the Hyperloop? Is it destined to join the ranks of those historical transportation dreams that never quite materialized? Or is there still a chance it could become a reality?
That's the question we'll be exploring after the break as we delve into the arguments of both the proponents and the skeptics and try to determine whether the Hyperloop has a legitimate chance of transforming transportation as we know it.
I have to admit, after that last segment, I'm feeling a bit less optimistic about the Hyperloop.
Yeah.
It seems like every step forward is met with two steps back.
Uh-huh.
We've talked about the technical challenges, the safety concerns,
Right.
the potential for massive cost overruns,
Right.
and even skepticism from transportation experts.
Yeah.
It's hard not to wonder if the Hyperloop is just another technological pipe dream.
It's understandable to feel that way after considering all the obstacles.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to remember that innovation is rarely a straight line
Right.
from idea to reality.
Right.
There are always bumps along the road, unexpected challenges, and setbacks.
Yeah.
And sometimes those setbacks lead to new solutions and breakthroughs.
So you're saying there's still hope for the Hyperloop.
Maybe.
Okay. What would need to happen for it to move from the realm of concept to a viable mode of transportation?
Well, first and foremost, those technical challenges need to be addressed. We need to see significant advancements in materials science to create tubes that can withstand the pressure differential
Right.
over long distances in various terrains and under different environmental conditions.
Right. And those tubes need to be incredibly reliable and safe.
Exactly.
Yeah. I imagine there's a lot of research and development going on in those areas.
There is.
Are there any promising advancements that could potentially address those technical hurdles?
There are some interesting developments in areas like carbon fiber composites and advanced alloys
Okay.
that could potentially lead to stronger and lighter tubes.
Okay.
And advancements in sensing and monitoring technologies could help detect potential problems before they become catastrophic.
Yeah.
But it's still very early days.
Right.
These technologies are still in the experimental phase, and it's not clear whether they can be scaled up to meet the demands of a full-scale Hyperloop system.
It sounds like we're still a long way from having those robust, reliable tubes that are essential for the Hyperloop to be viable.
I think so.
What about the safety concerns? Is there any way to mitigate the risks associated with traveling at such high speeds in a near-vacuum environment?
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
Even with the strongest and most reliable tubes, there's always the possibility of an accident
Right.
or a malfunction.
Right.
And in a Hyperloop system, those accidents could be very serious.
Yeah.
Researchers are exploring various safety measures, such as emergency braking systems,
Right.
escape hatches,
Okay.
and redundant pressure control systems.
Okay. So backups upon backups.
Yeah. But ultimately, ensuring the safety of passengers in such an extreme environment will be a huge challenge.
You know, one of the things that struck me as we were discussing those early attempts at vacuum tube transportation
Right.
is how some of those projects were derailed by seemingly trivial problems,
Yeah.
like rats chewing on the leather seals in the atmospheric railway.
Uh-huh.
It makes you wonder what kind of unforeseen issues might crop up with the Hyperloop.
That's a valid point. It's impossible to predict every potential problem. And I'm sure there will be unforeseen challenges that arise as the technology develops.
Right.
The history of innovation is full of examples of projects that were delayed or abandoned due to unexpected issues.
Right.
And the Hyperloop, with its complexity and reliance on cutting-edge technologies, will likely be no exception.
So even if they solve the technical and safety issues, there's still the question of cost. And as we've discussed, the potential for cost overruns is huge.
It is.
Do you think there's any way to build a Hyperloop system within a reasonable budget?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Hyperloop proponents argue that the system will ultimately be more cost-effective
Okay.
than traditional high-speed rail because it requires less infrastructure
Okay.
and can operate more efficiently.
Right.
But as Smell and other critics point out, those claims need to be viewed with a healthy dose of skepticism.
Yeah.
Large infrastructure projects are notorious for exceeding their budgets. And the Hyperloop, with its unique challenges, is likely to be even more expensive than anticipated.
It seems like cost is going to be a major hurdle.
Yeah.
But even if a Hyperloop project manages to secure funding
Right.
and overcome those technical and safety challenges,
Yeah.
there's still the comfort of public acceptance.
Right.
Are people actually going to be willing to step into a pod and hurtle through a vacuum tube at hundreds of miles per hour?
That's another factor that can't be ignored.
Mm-hmm.
Public perception will play a huge role in the success or failure of the Hyperloop.
Yeah.
People need to feel safe and comfortable using the system.
Right.
And that might be a difficult hurdle to overcome.
Yeah.
There's a certain psychological barrier
Right.
when it comes to traveling at those speeds in such an enclosed environment.
I think you're right. It's one thing to read about it or see it in a movie.
Yeah.
It's quite another to actually experience it firsthand.
Exactly.
So after weighing all these factors, the technical challenges, the safety concerns,
Right.
the cost, the public perception, what's your overall assessment of the Hyperloop?
Honestly, it's hard to say for sure.
Yeah.
There's a lot of potential, but there are also a lot of very real obstacles.
Right.
If I had to make a prediction, I'd say the Hyperloop is still a long shot.
Okay.
The technology is still in its infancy, and the challenges are formidable.
Right.
But that doesn't mean it's impossible.
Right.
Innovation often happens in unexpected ways, and it's possible that we'll see breakthroughs that could make the Hyperloop more viable in the future.
So you're not completely writing it off.
I'm not, no.
It sounds like you're cautiously optimistic or perhaps optimistically cautious.
I think that's a fair assessment.
Yeah.
I'm not ready to dismiss the Hyperloop entirely. It's a bold and ambitious idea, and I admire the vision behind it, but I
Yeah.
also think it's crucial to be realistic about the challenges.
Right.
And to avoid getting swept up in the hype,
Right.
we need to let the technology develop, address those technical and safety concerns,
Yeah.
and see if the costs can be brought down to a reasonable level. And ultimately, it will be up to the public to decide whether they're comfortable embracing this new mode of transportation.
Well said. I think that's a great note to end on.
Okay.
We've covered a lot of ground today exploring the history of vacuum tube transportation,
Yeah.
the emergence of the Hyperloop, and the many challenges and possibilities it presents.
Right.
It's a fascinating story,
It is.
and it will be interesting to see how it unfolds in the years to come.
Yeah, it will.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Hyperloop.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
It's been a thought-provoking journey, and we hope you've learned something new and gained a deeper understanding of this intriguing, if somewhat elusive technology. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep into the world of ideas.